Eddie Van Halen didn't just play the guitar, he changed the gravitational pull of the instrument. Everything from his tone to his tapping to the way he held the pick reshaped what rock guitar could be. But behind his revolutionary rise was a private list, a set of names that represented not hatred in the childish sense, but deep artistic conflict, disappointment, heartbreak, and rivalry. These weren't nobodies. These were legends Eddie admired, guitarists who inspired him long before the world knew his name. And because they mattered to him, the tensions cut even deeper. Today, we open the chapters of Eddie's life that reveal the 6 guitarists who stirred his emotions the most, the ones whose actions or attitudes left lasting marks on him, for better or worse. 6. Eric Clapton, the idol who shattered a dream. Before Eddie ever electrified the world with Eruption, before he invented tricks players still struggle to imitate, he was just a skinny kid in Pasadena staring at an album cover with wide eyes. And on that album stood Eric Clapton, the British guitar god who defined the soundtrack of Eddie's teenage world. Eddie didn't simply like Clapton, he worshipped him. While his peers drooled over Hendrix or Page, Eddie locked himself away for hours, dropping the needle on Cream records one microscopic section at a time. He rewound and replayed until the grooves were nearly worn out, dissecting Clapton's bends, vibrato, phrasing, fingerprints on the fretboard. It wasn't copying, it was communion. Years later he'd say, "I played Clapton almost exclusively, note for note. That was my foundation." So, naturally, meeting Clapton should have been a dream. Instead, it stung more than Eddie ever admitted publicly. When Eddie was finally invited to a session with his childhood hero, something he'd fantasized about since before Van Halen was even a garage band, he played for Clapton the way a son tries to impress a father, heart in hand, hoping for a smile. But what he got was cold dismissal. Clapton reportedly found his technique excessive, even distasteful. Too many notes, too much tapping, too untraditional. To Clapton, the beauty of guitar was in restraint. To Eddie, it was in explosion. Eddie later admitted those words instantly brought back the childhood memories he tried his entire life to outrun, polished piano teachers telling him he wasn't good enough. That familiar ache returned. And yet Eddie still honored Clapton, still defended him, still credited him. Because the heartbreak of a hero cutting you down only hurts when that hero truly matters. 5. Ritchie Blackmore, the swordmaster who would not speak. If Clapton was Eddie's foundation, then Ritchie Blackmore was his fire. Eddie adored Blackmore's intensity, the classical flourishes, the razor-sharp attack, the unpredictable danger that lurked in every deep purple solo. When Eddie finally had the chance to meet him backstage, he expected at least a nod of mutual respect, not praise, not conversation, just acknowledgement between 2 guitarists who lived on the same battleground. Instead, Blackmore didn't say a single word. Eddie described it painfully simply. He gave me the shaft with his eyes. That was it. No handshake, no hello, no recognition. Just a stare, cold and final, as if Eddie didn't exist. For years, Eddie shrugged this off in interviews, pretending he didn't care. But it gnawed at him. He built part of his musical identity around the man, around the riffs, the attitude, the unhinged precision, only to be brushed aside like an annoying fan. Still, Eddie's feelings toward Blackmore were complicated that he studied him, respected him, borrowed from him. And even years later, he still called Blackmore one of the best. Sometimes the deepest cuts come not from enemies, but from those we elevate. For Joe Perry, a clash of perception and pride. Some rivalries are born from direct conflict, others from misunderstanding. Eddie and Joe Perry never fought, never exchanged insults. Yet, Eddie once confessed that he thought Perry had problems with him, only to walk that back later. It wasn't that Perry attacked him, it was simply the awkward gravity that forms when 2 very different musicians orbit the same universe. Joe Perry was a bluesy, big riff guitarist with swagger and grit. Eddie was a lightning bolt ripping through amplifiers. They played the same instrument, but lived in different dimensions. Somewhere along the way, Eddie got the impression that Perry looked down on his style, not out of malice, but out of difference. Perry didn't tap, dive bomb, or shred at warp speed. His world was about feel and rebellion, not technique. But here's the truth. Joe Perry never disrespected Eddie Van Halen. In fact, he publicly praised him many times. The conflict lived mostly in Eddie's head, a byproduct of fame, pressure, insecurity, and the inner storms that follow prodigies. Eddie was famously sensitive beneath all that confidence. A sideways look could feel like a judgment. And so Perry became a symbolic presence in Eddie's story, not an enemy, but a mirror reflecting Eddie's own fear of being misunderstood. 3. Tom Scholz, the engineer who made guitar a laboratory. Tom Scholz wasn't a rival in personality. He was a rival in philosophy. While Eddie built his sound from instinct, experimenting, tweaking, burning through gear, Scholz, the mastermind behind Boston, built his from science. Harvard degree, MIT credentials, a mind that designed circuits the way most guitarists design riffs. To Eddie, guitar was visceral. T.O. Scholz, it was architectural. Eddie admired Boston's incredible tones, even calling them groundbreaking. But he also criticized what he saw as Scholz's over-engineering. Music made in a lab, not a garage. Scholz might spend weeks perfecting a single guitar sound. Eddie would throw an amp together with wires hanging and invent a tone that influenced a generation. The tension wasn't personal. It was ideological, two geniuses approaching the same mountain from opposite sides. Eddie was the wild, mad scientist, Scholz was the disciplined engineer. And in their contrast, each defined the other. 2. Rick Derringer, the uninvited copycat. Of all the encounters that shook Eddie, few were as infuriating as Rick Derringer publicly duplicating his entire approach right in front of him. Eddie recalled attending a Derringer performance shortly after Van Halen broke big. He expected a solid set. Instead, he heard someone playing his licks, mimicking his tone, even imitating his signature two-handed tapping, a technique Eddie innovated and guarded deeply. Years later, still hurt, Eddie told MTV, "I thought that was low. This wasn't admiration. This wasn't tribute. This was theft, at least in Eddie's eyes." But the deeper wound wasn't musical imitation. It was that Eddie didn't see himself as a master whose techniques should be copied. He saw himself as an explorer. The joy for him was in discovery. Watching someone take his unpolished innovations and perform them as polished routines felt like someone stealing pages from a diary. And yet, time healed this one too. Decades later, Eddie softened. He's a good guy. A nice guy. Because beneath the anger, Eddie knew imitation is the price of revolution. Once the world hears lightning, everyone wants to hold the bottle. 1. Randy Rhoads, the rival who never got to finish the conversation. And then there was Randy Rhoads, the only guitarist Eddie ever truly viewed as a force equal to his own. This wasn't jealousy. This wasn't hatred. It was collision, two meteors blazing across the same sky. Randy came from a classical background, weaving scales with a precision Eddie respected but didn't seek to emulate. Where Eddie was volcanic, Randy was sculpted. Their styles contradicted yet complemented each other. But what made their tension legendary was the bitter truth Eddie admitted later. He was quite good, but I was better. Those words weren't arrogance, they were armor. Randy's skill pushed Eddie, challenged him, reminded him he wasn't alone in the race to redefine guitar. But their relationship was complicated by competition. Randy privately criticized Eddie's sloppiness, calling him more spontaneous than structured. Eddie, in turn, dismissed Randy's faculty-like perfectionism. The tragedy, of course, is that Randy never lived long enough for their rivalry to evolve into friendship. When Eddie heard Randy had died in that horrific plane crash, he wept. The shredder world lost its brightest rising star. Eddie lost the one rival he actually wanted to debate, jam with, argue with, learn from, maybe even reconcile with. Years later, Eddie quietly said Randy's death broke his heart. Their story never reached its conclusion, which is why it lingers the loudest. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started.